Anti-apartheid activist and former PAC president Motsoko Pheko has died at the age of 93. In a statement, his family says he passed away yesterday. Pheko spent decades in exile after being released from prison due to his anti-apartheid activities. He joined the PAC in 1960 and served the party in different roles. In 2007, Pheko was fired from the party for allegedly failing to account for funds in the Robert Sobukwe Fund. He successfully challenged the expulsion in the Cape High Court, but was eventually expelled in 2008. His family has asked for privacy during this time. Now, for reaction to the passing of anti-apartheid activist and former PAC president Motsoko Pheko, we now joined by family friend Zandi Radebe. Zandi, a very good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us, albeit, I'm sure, for the family and friends under very tough conditions.
Indeed, and thank you for having us. The family has received the news of the passing of their beloved father and grandfather, and they've taken the time to really process the news. And so we have been receiving support from family, friends and comrades across the globe. But like you had mentioned, the family does ask that they be given time to process and to also make the necessary funeral arrangements for Umtate.
And understandably, Zandi, this is news that is hardly a day old, but how's the family keeping at this point, understanding that the passing of a family elder is definitely a tough one to swallow for any family?
Well, as you can imagine, Dr. Motsoko Pheko was a phenomenal figure in the Azanian liberation history of struggle. And therefore, when the news broke out, the family was inundated with calls, both from the media, but also from sympathizers and people who were just moved and shocked by the passing of Elder Motsoko Pheko, whom he recently celebrated 90 years, 3 years ago. And so a lot of us were still, expecting a lot from Tate. Having seen him, when he turned 90, he was looking very healthy. He was also intellectually vibrant, even in just before he passed, because 2024 I think is a very special year in the Azanian calendar, in that this year we also celebrated Mangaliso Sobukwe's centenary, and the University of South Africa had a conference there. Motsoko Pheko was able to pen and send us a message of solidarity, which was experienced by the conference attendees, which included international scholars. And you can see that at 93 years old, Dr. Motsoko Pheko was still very vibrant and had an intellectual life that most of us did not even appreciate or understand. But that's what he gave to us.
Zandi, as you say, a literary giant in his own right. But, how would you like Africans, how would you like, the people of South Africa to remember this giant who really served his country, but also, penned some great literary words for future generations?
The question of remembrance and commemoration is a very important one within the Pan-Africanist tradition, because Dr. Motsoko Pheko, much like Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe, comes from a political tradition that has been erased out of history books in South Africa, but also erased out of national consciousness. And so to remember him, we have to also remember Mangaliso Robert Sobukwe. But at the same time, we have to then appreciate the type of activist that Dr. Motsoko Pheko was, because he, like Mangaliso Sobukwe, was the founding member of the Pan-Africanist Congress in 1960. And he has contributed tremendously to the Azanian liberation struggle, and including in the post-1994 South African context, where he served as a member of parliament, occupying different portfolios, including foreign affairs, safety and security, justice and constitutional development and culture, including science and technology. These were all areas with which he had written tremendously and published tremendously, under which he also is one of the longest serving president of the PAC, because if you think about it, President Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe served from 1959 to 1978. He was then followed by President Motsoko Pheko from 1978 to 1986. Motsoko Pheko then came to lead the PAC during, the moment democracy as well as during democracy. So here is an individual who got to see South Africa before transitioning into democracy and lived in South Africa during the apartheid times. He has seen 30 years of democracy. That is how we think he should be remembered. And also his contribution as a scholar, because Dr. Motsoko Pheko is not just an activist. He's a scholar, a learner, somebody who holds a number of academic accolades, including degrees in systematic theology, sociology, history, and political sciences, including a law degree in international law that he got from the University of London. He's a prolific scholar, an activist, someone who reminds us that, activism and scholarship do go hand in hand. Perhaps this is how South Africa should remember him.
And Zandi, legacy is very important, particularly for somebody who, as you say, has served his country before apartheid, and just in the 30 years of democracy that we have seen. What sort of legacy do you think he leaves behind as an anti-apartheid activist, but also somebody who was even active during the freedom years?
What remains a very important characteristic of the kind of leader that Dr. Motsoko Pheko was is the fact that even as an activist, he never neglected his scholarship interest. And therefore, even as he was in parliament, he advocated for a particular type of education and was not apologetic in addressing some of the most fundamental questions that continue to confront post-1994, South Africa. This includes particularly the land question. He's known as one of the most radical scholars who have understood what it has meant for the indigenous people to lose the land. And he's continued to not only tell us that the land was stolen from the hands of African people, but he also reminded us that our knowledges were also stolen, right? And if you think about what the Fees Must Fall students were demanding, they were demanding a decolonized education, something that Dr. Motsoko Pheko had already started to think and write about in his work. He's also a very generous individual, both as a scholar, as an intellectual. As I mentioned earlier, 93 years of age. And he was not the healthiest of persons because, he was already ill at the time, but he was able to sit down and pen a message of solidarity that could be received by a university that was celebrating Sobukwe. You'd also know that Motsoko Pheko has gone and published a total of 30 books, and he has generously donated those books to the University of South Africa at no charge. So the man is defined not only by his sacrifices, but also by his spirit of generosity as Mu-Africa.
Zandi, as you speak about some of the works that he has done, he's written about law, he's written about politics, about science, but he wrote extensively also about theology, about religion, which also shows another different aspect of the man beyond being a Pan-Africanist and a freedom fighter per se. He wrote very strongly and passionately about Christianity and theology.
Absolutely. Dr. Motsoko Pheko comes from a generation of scholars that was, influenced by Christianity as the dominant religion in a context of apartheid and colonialism. But as a scholar, he was able to wrestle with the question of religion and Christianity from a Black Africanist perspective. And this is some of the conversations that we are still unfolding, conversations that we're still trying to unpack as scholars today. Indeed, his work put him head and shoulders, ahead of the rest. I think we can only learn from the gift of learning and writing and thinking radically, thinking very dangerously as a Pan-Africanist. That's the legacy that Dr. Pheko has left behind for us.
Zandi, thank you so much for taking this time to speak to us. Condolences to the family and friends of Dr. Motsoko Pheko. Zandi Radebe, who is a family friend, talking to us there as we pay tribute to a literary and an anti-apartheid giant.